we're standing here in front of Fenman House, which is southern part of our development R5 in King's Cross. It's part of the big master plan, big development for Argent. It's been here for quite a while now. The first part was finished already 10 years ago, and it was a kind of pioneer building here at the time because the whole of this northern part of the area was completely empty, stripped of the old railway structure, and it's a residential building, tenure blind, as private affordable housing in it, and affordable extra care. It's made up of 4 buildings, 1 tiny one, 3 main ones, around a courtyard. It faces into this new garden square, which at the time was, when we designed it, was kind of part of our design and the adjustment of kind of some layout to this whole area, which is called the kind of R zone in the master plan. This garden square is a kind of addition to the big cubit square, which is just out that side there. And the building, or the group of buildings, is designed as an urban block, which has a shoulder height, the kind of perimeter, which was influenced by our thinking about the scale of the European city. Something that felt familiar in this area where, as I said, at the time was nothing there, and we tried to get our head around this new density that was coming in, but we also had to accommodate more. So the taller buildings, the 2 taller elements on the north and the southern part, Saxon Court and Fenman House, and those taller parts were integrated into these parameter buildings, as kind of something that would project up. This is 16 stories. The area around here is all governed in height by the viewing corridors to St. Paul's, so no further height allowed. I joined the practice when Accordia had just started, and that was quite a jump in scale from Accordia coming to this, I think, and then ever since we've worked, I guess, a lot on larger projects in London, and have somehow become specialists, I guess, of this kind of higher density housing in London and very specific solutions to these urban sites. And more recently I've worked on a scheme for Stanhope, which is part of the Television Centre redevelopment in White City, where we're doing the affordable housing, and it's releases the second phase, the building of that, and it's just gone on site, so that's really exciting. 2 big blocks. And then I'm working with Argent again in Brent Cross in the big Allies Morrison master plan there, and it's similar to this King's Cross project in the way that it's going to be the first building there. So again, this kind of jump in scale is being introduced. It's very exciting to be working on. And I've also, on a different scale, I've also recently led a multidisciplinary team doing a big master plan in Thamesmead for Peabody on the Lessons estate. Again, very interesting. I'm a supporter of taller buildings, but I have my skepticism around very, very, very tall buildings. I think I'm a great supporter of the idea of active frontages and binding communities together, and I guess, and I'm not sure, this is probably not completely grounded, it's more an emotional aspect, that I wonder that in these absolutely enormous buildings there are no streets and there is no active frontage, but there's a whole community of people living there together, and that kind of similar way of meeting in the street that you try to encourage, it doesn't really happen there, and I'd never quite know what that means for a building that's 50 stories with this huge community. But of course, I think some of these tall buildings try to tackle that by having communal spaces to encourage the meeting of the community that lives there together. That's positive, and I think it works sometimes, but not in the kind of natural way that people meet in the street. I'm really fond of this scheme here in King's Cross because 1 building contains extra care, later living units, and I think it's so wonderful for it to be possible for people to stay in their community. So people who've always lived in Camden live here at the heart of it all, with the park outside their front door, and I feel there should be a lot more of that in London. I think there is, an aspect about durability and zero maintenance around brickwork. There's a history of brickwork in London. I think there's a material quality to it that has a richness. And so, not one brick building has to look like another. There's a huge riches in choice of colour and surfaces. I do sometimes now worry about embodied carbon of brickwork, and we study more closely where they come from, what type of brick has which embodied carbon. We've learned that black ones have a higher embodied carbon, for example, because interesting aspects about that. But as an expression, I still fully embrace it. I think there's also kind of an emotional aspect always in housing, and I think it gives people who live in buildings, a feeling of safety and robustness. I think we're very aware of the rising prices and inflation, which is something, inflation is something that the industry hasn't had to deal with for 20 years or longer, and it's something that needs to be considered in projects, particularly the projects that we work on of that scale, which take years and years to go from the first thought to the implementation. If you then think about price inflation, I think it will lead to issues. I think we're kind of bracing ourselves for later in the year. I think it's really interesting that all the new briefs we're getting have an introduction of 15 pages, which are all about changes, wanting to pick up what we've all lived through in the COVID period. But then in the brief for the units themselves and the urge for efficiency, not that much has changed. However, I think everyone's much more aware that a private outdoor, as in a balcony garden, is so important to people. So where planning authorities before would sometimes let go of the requirements, I think we're seeing that this really is now demanded much more stringently. And as well as, I think they're thinking about public realm. I think it's been on the forefront for the last 10 years, but I think the importance of it has become even more important. So currently I'm also working in Meridian Water on this big new scheme on an empty site, and there lots and lots of thinking is going into the public realm. So those are, I think, important changes, good changes.